The most dangerous prison is not the one with bars. It is the one that teaches you to guard your own thoughts. Most people never realize how power quietly shapes the choices they make every day. Learning to see the mechanics of control, manipulation, and surveillance can transform how you understand society, and, more importantly, how you protect your own freedom of thought. This is 1984 by George Orwell, explained by Beyond the Books. Let's begin. Control rarely arrives with fanfare. It doesn't begin with chains or sirens or locked doors. It begins in whispers, through the subtle rearranging of perception. A quiet edit to what you notice. A gentle shift in what feels safe to believe. A slow training of the mind, until obedience feels like common sense. In Orwell's 1984, the true strength of the party isn't just in telescreens or torture chambers. It's in the architecture of the human mind. They don't only rule over bodies, they engineer the inner world those bodies inhabit. Real control doesn't start by locking you up. It starts by locking in your frame of mind. Imagine living in a world where even your private thoughts are no longer fully yours. Your memories can be rewritten. Your understanding of the present can be replaced with an official version. And slowly, without noticing, you start to believe it. How does that become possible? Because controlling thought begins with controlling language. Newspeak, the party's engineered language, seems at first like a simple tool. Fewer words, easier communication. But under the surface, fewer words mean fewer possibilities. If there is no word for rebellion, how do you even imagine rebelling? If the word freedom disappears, how long before the very idea of freedom fades? Take away the words, and you take away the invisible doors people never knew they could open. Now, look at your own life. The phrases you repeat without thinking. The labels you've accepted quietly over time. The slogans and trends you echo, because everyone else does. Words are not neutral. Every phrase you adopt draws the borders of what feels possible to believe about yourself. If language shapes thought, and thought shapes possibility, then shrinking language doesn't just quiet society. It shrinks the human mind. This is more than fiction. It's a blueprint for how influence operates. Softly, invisibly, below awareness. The party's real genius was never just in violence. It was in creating a world where violence became unnecessary. Once your inner reality is colonized, your outer obedience requires no chains at all. The most effective control is the kind you start practicing on yourself. This is why Winston matters. His rebellion does not begin with an army. It does not begin with a speech. It does not begin with a public act of courage. It begins almost invisibly, with a diary, a private sentence, a forbidden memory, a thought he refuses to surrender. That is what makes him dangerous, not because he has power, but because he still has an inner life. In a world built to erase privacy, even a private thought becomes rebellion. Which brings us to the second layer, surveillance. The telescreens are unforgettable. Constant monitoring, the sense that you are never alone. But here's the subtlety. Surveillance doesn't just catch you when you're wrong, it shapes who you are before you even act. When you believe you are always watched, you start to rewrite yourself. You rehearse before speaking. You shave down the edges of your opinions. You live in a smaller, safer version of yourself. Eventually, no guard is needed. You've already become your own. The shadow of observation. is enough to make most people choose invisibility over risk. Think about your own life, your digital footprint, your social media feeds, the quiet pressure to appear composed, likable, safe. Do you check who viewed your posts? Rewrite texts before sending? Stay silent in groups to avoid standing out? That is self-policing. That is emotional outsourcing. Waiting for others to confirm. You're allowed to feel okay. You've internalized the watcher. Surveillance leads to self-policing, leads to predictable obedience. The chain is subtle, but it's strong. Julia shows another kind of rebellion. Not philosophical, not organized, not built on grand ideas. Her rebellion is personal, physical, immediate. She steals small pleasures from a world that wants every desire managed. She refuses to let the party own every corner of her body, every private affection, every human impulse. But even this kind of rebellion has limits, because the party does not only want public obedience, it wants the private self. It wants the place inside you, where love, memory, and desire still belong to you. That is why Winston and Julia's relationship matters. Their love is not just romance, it is a temporary country of two. A fragile space where the party has not yet fully entered. And for that reason, it cannot be allowed to survive. Now, combine surveillance with language control. Words shape what you can think. Surveillance shapes who you allow yourself to be. Together, they bend a person from the inside out. Rebellion doesn't need punishment to fail. It simply stops feeling like an option. Then comes the third layer, manipulating reality itself. The Ministry of Truth doesn't just spread propaganda. It rewrites history. If you can control the past, you can define the present. And if you define the present, you can dictate the future. Memory is not a fixed archive. It's fluid. It bends toward the stories we repeat. Give someone a new story long enough, and it can quietly replace the old one. Change the story often enough, and a person will quietly change who they believe they are. This is where O'Brien becomes terrifying. He does not merely threaten Winston. He seduces him intellectually. He understands the shape of Winston's hunger. His need to believe there is something real, something solid, something the party cannot touch. And then O'Brien attacks that very need. He doesn't only want Winston to obey, he wants Winston to accept the party's version of reality as truth. Not because it makes sense, but because power says it is so. This is the deepest kind of domination. Not forcing someone to say a lie, but breaking them until the lie becomes the only world left. Identity is fragile when it leans on borrowed narratives. This is narrative gravity, the pull that reshapes yourself around the loudest story. The party used it expertly, and we see it today whenever people adopt beliefs, goals, or even personalities. That feels safer to explain to the world than to themselves. Most people imagine oppression as brute force. Orwell revealed something more delicate. Reduce the language. Monitor the mind. Rewrite the story of reality. Let people assist in their own erasure. At first, it doesn't feel dangerous. It just feels easier. Easier to conform than explain. Easier to agree than resist. Easier to forget than guard a memory no one else will confirm. This is where doublethink is born, holding two contradictory beliefs and accepting both. It sounds absurd until you realize it's survival. It lets someone live in a world where truth keeps changing. Here's the cruel brilliance. The more contradictions you accept to stay safe, the more loyalty the system gains. Because every act of self-betrayal feels like self-preservation. You can lose yourself one compromise at a time, and no one will call it a disappearance. Look outside the novel. You defend a draining job because you should be grateful. You rationalize a painful relationship to avoid being alone. You nod along with ideas you secretly reject. Because silence is easier than standing alone. That's doublethink. And once you reach it, the system, whatever it is, no longer needs to fight you. You've already chosen the self it rewards. Now the full chain is clear. Language leads to surveillance, leads to narrative control, leads to doublethink. Language limits imagination. Surveillance enforces constant self-editing. Narrative control reshapes memory and identity. Doublethink keeps the contradictions alive, without breaking the self. Together, they form a closed loop of psychological domination. Each piece alone is fragile, but combined, they endure for generations, without a single wall or weapon. And then comes room 101, the final chamber, the place where resistance is not argued with, but personalized. Room 101 does not simply punish Winston. It finds the one fear, strong enough to make him betray the last private truth he owns. The party understands something brutal. To destroy a person completely, you do not only have to make them suffer, you have to make them participate in the destruction of what they love. That is why the ending hurts. Winston's defeat is not just that he is broken. It is that the party turns his own fear against the part of him that was still free. Here's the truth to carry with you. 1984 is not just a warning about governments. It's a mirror for how any culture, ideology, or environment can slowly convince human beings to surrender themselves. The party doesn't only break people, it remakes them until the final betrayal is turning against the self, who once believed resistance was possible. The most terrifying loss is not freedom. It's the quiet surrender of the self. The future changes, not when you notice the cage, but when you decide you will not live as if it is normal. Right now, write one sentence the world will never rewrite for you. Something true you'll protect, even if no one else does. Not because the world approves it, not because it is easy to say, but because it is yours. Comment unwritten. If you refuse to let the world rewrite your truth, like this video, subscribe to Beyond the Books, and tell us which book you want to see unmasked next. Because here, we don't just read stories, we reclaim our own.